Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I'm Teena Jha, you're watching Perspective. India's per capita income has doubled to 1,72,000 rupees in nominal terms since 2014-15. According to National Statistics Office data, the per capita income in terms of net national income in current prices stood at 1,72,000 rupees in 2022-23 with a growth rate of 15.8% over the previous year. This would be nearly double of 86,647 rupees back in 2014-15. Now, per capita income at the current prices was estimated at 1,27,065 rupees and 1,48,524 rupees respectively for the years 2020-21 and 21-22. So this indicates that there has been a consistent rise in per capita income. Now, how significant is this growth? What does an increased per capita income mean for the people and the economy? How can per capita income growth be sustained to ensure that the momentum continues? And also, what are the persistent challenges? All this and much more in perspective today with three distinguished panelists who are joining us on the program today. I'm delighted to have with us in the studio Mr. Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, Consulting Editor, The Business Standard. Thank you, sir, for your time. And joining us virtually are two guests, Dr. Subhash Chandra Pandey, former Special Secretary and Financial Advisor, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and Dr. A.K. Sharan, Professor and Dean, Manav Rachna International Institute of Research and Studies. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the program as well. Mr. Bhattacharjee, before we get into the numbers and how significant they are, if I could ask you to put into perspective for us and our viewers, what is per capita income in real terms and in nominal terms?
Well, anything that's on real terms essentially means that the inflation impact has been netted out, which means that we are able to compare quantities across different time zones. Because what happens is when inflation comes in, then the different inflation episodes of different years tends to affect the numbers. In some years when inflation is very high, the numbers like a GDP or something could balloon up. Whereas if you take it on real terms, then those impact is netted out. So for statisticians, it becomes a much more easier comparison, provided of course the deflator, which is the way in which sort of nets out that process, has been accurately assessed. And remember one thing, that the per capita income, which comes from the net national product, is actually again a sort of a number divided by the population. Of course, that's where the numbers comes from. But it is something which is often a sort of a, what should we call, a residual of the entire statistical process of estimating the GDP and the NNP and the NDP. So you don't really get it as a very useful number at the initial stages, because it's not something on which planners can work on. It comes with a time lag. And it's also something which many countries don't use. And in India also, there have been lots of debates on it. But what it does show, and in this case, as this particular set of numbers from the Statistical Commission shows, is that National Statistics Office shows that there is a trend. It shows a trend which is a very interesting thing to see. Which way is the numbers moving? Remember, we don't have a consumption expenditure survey. So we don't at the micro level, in sense, when we want to assess how are people's lives changing when we discuss GDP and other things. We don't often get a very good idea, because our consumption expenditure survey has not been done for several years. It is, the next results will come out in 2023, when we'll have a very good handle to understand how people's consumption is changing. So per capita income that way is an interesting one, which sort of gives you a fairly good direction set of which way it is moving, despite all its infirmities, and we can discuss about that.
Sure. Professor Sharan, now with that clarity on what per capita income in real terms and nominal terms means, how significant are these numbers from the NSO? If you could break it down for us and our viewers.
Yes, the numbers which have been given by the NSO as a responsible office of the Government of India. So as such, the numbers would have been, disclosed or published after taking due precautions, but with some estimates that come from some of the academic institutions, the great researchers like JNU and other institutions. When we have also taken the inflation into account for the past years, it has been on an average 4%, which has been worked out, the growth rate. So on a real basis, as you posed the question with Mr. Bhattacharya also, the nominal numbers would be any numbers, but when you deflate it, it comes to 4% broadly. This is one thing. Second thing is that the numbers, as also by my predecessor has been correctly said, that when you divide the whole number by the total population, you get a figure of 1 lakh some thousands here. But then this will also include the non-earning members, the children and everybody, because it is the denominator is just your population. So that's another fallacy, I would say, here in calculation of these numbers to be used for any planning purposes. And the third thing is, which we have not much brought out here, is the inequity or how this whole thing is distributed.
Of course, Professor Sharan, we'll talk about the inequality in just a bit. But before that, if we could just look at the NSO numbers, Dr. Pandey, and understand how this number has doubled since 2014 to now. What are the factors that you would attribute to this kind of growth?
See, this in nominal term from 86,000 to 172,000, as Mr. Bhattacharya rightly put it, includes the effect of inflation. The consumption basket remaining at certain level, the prices of goods and services would have gone up, and therefore it is reflected in these nominal numbers. So more realistically, we should see it in real terms at constant prices. And at constant prices, the same NSO is given at 11-12 prices. And that number is 72,805 in 2014-15 to 98,118 in 22-23. So from 72,000 to 98,000. This is keeping the prices, assuming the prices to be the same as at the level of 11-12. Now, there are two factors that will affect this per capita distribution of national income. One is price and other is population. So when I am talking about 72,000 in 14-15, the population assumed in 14-15 is different than the population assumed in 22-23. In 14-15, the population number assumed was 126.7 crore. And in 22-23, the population figure assumed is 138.3 crore. Now, we don't have a census number as yet. So these are extrapolated estimates, and therefore one can go wrong on the assumptions. But broadly, it shows that in this process, while the income has gone up from this level to this, the population has also increased almost 9% plus. So that also reduces the per capita, the denominator increases and reducing the per capita. So if we factor that, then this at the same current prices, constant prices and constant population, the per capita would be almost 9 to 10% higher.
So, Mr. Bhattacharya, if you look at the inflation factor, of course, inflation and the manner in which the world today is reeling under inflation, the impact of inflation, the fact that the increase that is being projected is much more or less if we factor in inflation, and in future also, will this continue to be a worry?
You know what? Let's not get into the inflation bit, because that's in any case coming with the territory. Let's look at what the per capita income data tells us. Is it a useful indicator for policy work? But that's where we would essentially be coming in from. I would say that the very fact that this data has come out, very soon we shall get a consumer household expenditure data, and hopefully by next year the census data provides a rich source of data to understand how the Indian economy is moving. You know, the very important thing to remember is that we are talking about the Indian economy now of 3.5 trillion economy. Very soon, in another few years, you can take whichever date, but it will be about 5 trillion or so, and then is gradually rising. It's a very huge change. Now, even if you take into account all sorts of caveats, कि किसके पास जा रहा है, कितने में, how much is it divided, how is it divided, what you get to see is that a very large segment of world population, which is about 1.4 billion people, are now going to live with a far higher level of disposable income. What does it do, for instance? I mean, you can't just think of them now as absurdly poor. You can't think of them as people, you know, who are living on handouts. They now have very clear a person at make estimate for inflation. India's inflation is not shooting up in the skies; it's rising gradually. And now that sort of a population. What is their thought process in terms of their family style? Mr. Pandey talked about the fact that, and that's very rightly pointed out, that per capita income, you know, multiplied by a family of 5. Now, it's not going, everybody is not spending it exactly, but it's a family. In a family of 5, a per capita income, so that means we're roughly looking at least, even with inflation deflated, about 4 lakh rupees. What sort of a lifestyle is it that they are thinking about? What are their aspirations that will be coming around? What are therefore the challenges they're throwing before the government to craft responses? You know, the responses like the Jal Jeevan, that's a very useful thing. Electricity, that's a very useful thing, because these are things which people can use. So it will now force both the central government and the state governments to come up with much more smarter responses from a far more, well, I mean, a population which has moved up in terms of their resources, a large percentage of the resources of people. Now that means more challenges in terms of their aspirations. Right. Remember, there's also a very young population on which this is happening. So, you know, it actually creates a space for lots of interesting policy. It also creates challenge for politicians to come up with very smart responses to a very young population, which is rising income. And so these, therefore, I would say are very major takeaways from this sort of a measurement.
This will, of course, mark what the future moves, policy moves will be in our country. But Professor Sharan, coming back to the aspect that you raised earlier on about inequities, and a lot of economists have spoken about how in India, much of this increase that is being spoken about in the NSO numbers is accrued to just about 10% of the population. So that there's an uneven distribution which could be a challenge which we need to address.
Layer ways can be put up, because what Mr. Bhattacharya has just suggested, that the availability, an average availability of resources in a family, which the number which he has placed, seems not to be very realistic, because the total consumption basket of one segment of the population will be very different from the other segment of the population. So therefore, to give a policy response to that, because the basket composition is going to change with those who have higher levels of income as compared to those who do not get those higher levels of income. So when you talk about the policy response in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of banking, in terms of FMCG sector, that is fast moving consumable goods, it has to be addressed keeping into consideration the diverse needs of the people who are our future consumers. Another mention came of the young population. We've been saying about the demographic dividends, and we're very impressed with this idea. But the larger issue is, unless we are going to address the challenges emanating from the areas such as employment, such as other areas, the real consumption spurt, that is what I am a little concerned about, that given in isolation the per capita income and given the other segments or the other facets of economic life, I think we have to be very careful in responding to these challenges through an intervention of the policy. So the policy for the consumers, the rural consumers, the other segment of the consumers, could be slightly differentiated from the policy which we are through which we are addressing our urban elites or a limited segment of the population, which is there for white goods, which is there for the luxurious goods. But then what wage goods we really need to continuously keep on producing, that also is going to be a bigger challenge in the times to come. This is what I would say.
Dr. Pandey, would you also agree, as a related point, that rising concentration means that those who are at the lower rung of the income ladder, their lives are not changing as much, their aspirations are, but in terms of what they have in hand aren't changing as much?
You see, when we are looking at the total population average, obviously the averages would conceal the disparity, the outliers, extremely rich and extremely poor. So to get a sense of how this average per capita is distributed population wise, we have to await the findings of the household consumption expenditure, which was launched in July 2022 and will continue up to June 23. So we will have these results sometime in the second half of 23. Then we would know. Now, this growth, economic growth with redistributive justice has been a steady concern with policy planners across all the plan periods since independence. And earlier it was said that when the size of the cake has to be increased while also trying to distribute the cake. Right. And sometimes the gap between effort to increase the size of the cake and effort to redistribute. So in the early days, there was a thinking about a trickle down theory, that we increase the size of the cake, we concentrate on economic growth, and then the benefits of growth will trickle down to the lower strata. And since it was realized that that trickle down did not take place, much later there was a policy change. And now with the enablement provided by technology, there are a number of schemes of direct benefit transfer which are bypassing wherever the large programs are by themselves unable to trickle down. The direct benefit transfers are plugging that loophole. So my sense would be that it is not the case that rich are becoming richer and poor are becoming poorer, which is the common refrain. The correct assessment in my view will be both are becoming richer but at different pace. Both are moving ahead but at different pace. So
okay. But Mr. Bhattacharjee, since we're talking about the inequalities and this continuing to be a persistent challenge, how do we factor in unevenness in the larger growth story? As Mr. Pandey said, there have been, of course, a lot of initiatives towards financial inclusion and towards pro-poor initiatives, but a lot more needs to be done to address this wide gap, which is leading to this unevenness.
You know, Teena, the point about the per capita income getting hijacked on the inequality issue doesn't really tell us much. Inequality or issues of equity has to be and is better understood by looking at other indicators, the Gini coefficient of consumption, for instance. You know, that sort of thing would tell you much better. And we don't have that sort of a data. What happens is that the per capita income, that it will be, I mean, we need to first of all look at the different income groups will have different responses to policies. That's understood. The point is that the government, in any case, with this number, is not in any case going to change its thrust on ensuring that the living standards for the poorest come up, right, you know, by providing the basic things. It's also not something that shows that the per capita income has risen, so the government doesn't need to provide many things. The point is that there is a large number of people now who will not be satisfied with just the provision of what is to be called the wage goods, you know, the basic necessities of life. The aspiration, what this number just tells you is one thing. And I think that's the only thing that tells you that the aspirations level, we talk about the aspirational Indian and all that, has changed. What does an aspiration, what does a group, even if you agree that there is inequality and all that, what does a group with, say, 1,20,000 look at in a year compared to somebody with, say, less than 80,000 a year? It's a major changes, because you're saying almost a 50% jump in the income. Okay. You know, these are the sort of stuff that needs to be understood, because otherwise policy responses could often go haywire in trying to, like, for instance, trying to look at what are not needed. As an example is, by saying that everybody is poor, states can be hoodwinked into giving freebies. This population, the per capita income rise hasn't come by giving freebies. It has come because the economy is moving. Right. The people are earning more in whichever, no matter how badly shaped are others, the income boxes. So you need to provide employment. You don't need to provide freebies. Right. The demand for providing that sort of thing is rising. That is those are the questions, and those are the appropriate responses that would come. Secondly, demand for skills. A person at that level will not be now satisfied. At a very poor level, the person just needs food. At this level, the person doesn't need just not food. She needs training. She's demanding training. The demand for skills will be much more higher. These are the questions, these are the sort of responses that will now become very sharp for the governments to understand. And these would need to be addressed. It's, it's all moving from, say, 1G to 2G. That's where I think the challenges come from.
So when we're talking about a heterogeneous population, Dr. Pandey, there are various groups whose aspirations will also differ. What should be the way forward then? So far, we've tried to, focus, and especially this government's focus has been on inclusion, on trying to provide skills, on employment, and clearly not freebies. But the larger question here is, there will be problems with the growing population, and especially the demands, the expectations, the aspirations of a younger population.
Yes, a young population can be a boon for the economy, provided there is equitable access to education, health, and skills. And that will in the years to come, we are going to have one of the largest and youngest workforce on the planet, and that is a very big positive. So some of the important initiatives that are being taken, there are two aspects I would like to highlight. One is the increasing emphasis for the manufacturing and infrastructure, and both have large multiplier effects in boosting incomes and distributing incomes. The manufacturing share in the economy has stagnated to around 16-17% for many decades. It is sticky, and with the production-linked incentive schemes and other such ease of doing business related measures, we hope at least in the years to come to take it to 20% of GDP or so. And similarly, that diversifying the dependent population on agriculture to move into manufacturing and services. So, and infrastructure has a many multiplier effects, and a large part of investment is now being put on that, whether it is logistics, railway, highways. So these two, I would think, are the right intervention, and certainly the direct benefit transfers for basic minimum services, that will continue.
Okay, Dr. Sharan, I'll take one last comment from you. So despite the challenges that we've spoken about of, being a huge population, the differing aspirations of a heterogeneous group, also the unevenness that you spoke about, but despite all of these unevenness, with the kind of efforts that have been taken over the last few years, India continues to be a bright spot in the world economy today. The fact that we need to now sustain this growth momentum. So to ensure that per capita growth per annum remains somewhere between 5 to 6%, what should be the way ahead according to you?
According to me, only three broad measures can be taken. One is to focus on further robust infrastructure development. Second is the employment through skill development. And the third one could be to reduce partly that divide. So these three measures, if you can take in, besides various what Mr. Pandey has been reiterating, the direct benefits transfers, these are governance reforms, but we have to focus more on the manufacturing sector, because manufacturing sector is the hub from where the growth can spurt. This is what I feel, and therefore infrastructure and manufacturing go together. Okay. We have to focus on that. Okay,
Mr. Bhattacharjee, time allows me to take up one comment from you also very quickly, if you can add.
Yeah, this is fine. As I said, the per capita income data just tells you that how much more difficult it becomes for the governments to decide on whatever. One major point we didn't talk on is the health. Right. A very major demand would be now becoming for equitable supply of health responses. And I think that will come faster than even the demand for education and skills.
And especially since we've just been through a pandemic.
Major pandemic. So I think that that's something where the movement has to be much more urgent.
Absolutely. Right. So that having been said, we'll have to wind up the program. That's it from us on this edition of Perspective. Thank you to all the guests for joining us on the program today and sharing your perspective with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you for your time as well. I'll see you same time tomorrow now. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.